Onakushe and Kabo, this now your current update from Sega Fox Media with me, Justice A.M. Tijan. On the 31st of May 2023, some executive members from the Media Foundation for West Africa, wey comot na Ghana, wey part of them work na for closely monitor media development, growth and press freedom, been join them partners, Media Reform Coordinating Group MLCG inside Salone, who said they be engaged media stakeholders and for talk on development and gains wey the media don make inside Salone, and also how for improve the safety of journalists them. This engagement here been take place at the Grassroots Gender Empowerment Movement Service Conference Hall, where tap na number 47 John Street, Freetown. We have been part of this engagement here, so for learn more.
In journalism, until today, it is now a faculty. So in the history of media education in Sierra Leone, Professor Kari, journalist and media scholar, has contributed enormously to where we are today. And I still remember, even in my, it's an example of a successful organization, because even when it's not there today as the founder and then head of the MFW, in fact, they are doing more than what we have loved them to do. On that note, I introduce the next person who is now our boss, the person who directs all of this within West Africa. Sunday, between Monday and yesterday, they have had a number of engagements, but the team considers this one to be the climax, to talk to people like you who are actually on the ground doing the media work in Sierra Leone. God will talk briefly about that, and we now go into the session cover, which is an engagement. So it's not a workshop, it's not a seminar, it's an engagement where the team would like to hear from you.
Of course, and a number of other newspapers. I'm glad also to know that the SLBC is still alive and kicking. When I was here, the first time I was here, I think in the very early 1990s, if you switched on to SLBC television, half the screen was dark and the pictures were not stable. At that time, there was a man called Tunis, who was the Director General, forgotten the real name, and then the lady, Madame Francis, what's the name, the lady, Madame, the Director General?
Jennifer Thomas?
Yes, Madame Banda Thomas. I remember all of them. I used to go to the SLTC premises. I haven't been there recently, but I hope the buildings have improved and all of that. I was also here when, during the military regimes, at the end of General Momo's regime and the coming of Strasser and all of that, the media were really frightened because a journalist's life was so worthless for most of all of these regimes that it was very, yet at that time there were very, very courageous journalists. The people who were running Awoko and so on and so forth could not be bothered. They were so strong, so courageous, almost to recklessness. But that's how they set the foundation to fight for the freedom that you are enjoying now. So we want to congratulate you for standing up for your country, for standing up for your profession, and maintaining the courage and working hard. We also know the difficulties of the newspaper industry in this country. At some point, Media Foundation, I think this was in the mid-1990s, the Media Foundation worked with Sludge and some of the publishers to set up a common printing press, and a common sourcing of newsprint, so that printing would be less so tedious, because at the time there was a point where there was only one Lebanese man who had a printing press and who also monopolized the importation of newsprint. And there was an attempt to build this collective so that the newspaper business would run smoothly. All of these were attempts by your own people to manage things in difficult times. We have also been part of activities to defend journalists who have found themselves on the wrong side of the law. I remember the case of a journalist who was beaten up by people hired by a lady who was in parliament also. Yes. Media Foundation intervened with some legal support and so on and so forth. The lawyer who was working with us died some years ago. I remember many of these sad cases of struggle here. I remember also some of your finest journalists, Mr. Fofana and others, really fine, world-class journalists who have stood up with the level of professionalism that makes you envious as a journalist. We are here this week because, and you will have to tell us if this is true or false, because you are here. The Media Foundation has been monitoring media development and media growth, press freedom in the region since 1997. As I said, we have been part of some of the processes of law reform. For instance, when the IMC was being set up, Mrs. Bernadette Cole and others sent us the draft of the act to look at. We gave it to some West African lawyers. We had a network of lawyers from different West African countries, and we gave it to some Sierra Leone and Nigerian lawyers who were working with us to critique it, and we sent the comments to Sierra Leone for the establishment of the IMC. So we've been also observing developments of how the law, and the laws here have been the same, inherited from Britain, as we have had in Ghana, Nigeria, the Gambia, the Anglophone zone. So we've been observing how the laws have been used to guard, to suppress, and to silence media or to intimidate media. A Media Foundation in the past couple of years, the past so many years, we found a number of progressive initiatives that we think make the work of the media, the conditions under which the media work, very progressive. All over the world today, democracy is on its back foot. Democracy is under siege. It's been under siege by all manner of forces around the globe. And so if a small country like Sierra Leone, a government is making these kinds of gestures, it means they are going against the stream of backward trend in democracy. And we thought we should come here and encourage the government. So we have met the Chief Justice, we have met the IGP, we have met the Vice President of the country, we have also met, who else, I think so. Yes, we have met the President of SLAN, we have met the IMC to express our appreciation, because human rights defense organizations like the Media Foundation, our stock in trade is finding fault with government, criticizing governments, but we think that when there is some positive thing going on, we must also encourage the government that they are in the right direction, and they must be encouraged to stay in that right direction. So we have expressed this to the Vice President, the IGP, and all of the people concerned. And we thought we must make you know that these things are not to be taken for granted. They are things we must cherish and hold very securely, like holding an egg, and protect these progressive steps that have been taken, so that we can keep widening the space for freedom of expression, democracy, and so on. All the time there are many forces, latent forces, that can militate against democracy, that can militate against freedom of expression, and so on. The media are always on the front line. I don't need to tell you that. We must be the light of the society. We must be the source of enlightenment. But those of you who go to church, somewhere in Luke, it says, but if the salt loses its saltness. So if you lose the direction, the whole society becomes wayward. They depend on the radio. We also know many of the difficulties facing the media. Community radio stations are having a hard time in terms of management, in terms of resources. Your newspapers are having a hard time. Some of you cannot sell 1,000 copies. For some, if they could sell 1,000 copies, I think they would stand up on the tallest buildings here and shout hooray. It's difficult. Where are the advertising coming from? Where is the readership coming from? There are so many newspapers. There have always been many newspapers in Freetown. Now, a country of 8 million people, you have about 500 radio stations. What are you going to do with 500 radio stations? Some will die, and they must die. And when they die, we shouldn't mourn them, because it is completely unsustainable. 500 radio stations. Fine, people can fancifully set these up for their own ego, but they are not economically viable. They won't be viable, and when they are not viable, the politicians step in, fund it, and use it for propaganda and other things that undermine professional and ethical standards. But what can we do? What can Slash do? What can the Editors Guild do? The Editors Guild used to meet in a place called, a bar called, there was a bar, they used to call it Stop Press. Stop Press. Is it still around? Oh, that's sad. For journalists, I think that it is as sad as the fall of the cotton tree. So you must pick it up again. There must always be somewhere where media people congregate, drink beer, eat, and talk about their professional life and prospects. So you must find a way of picking it up. So I will not bore you with things you already know. We came here to encourage you to keep struggling to protect, defend, and maintain the progress that has been made for press freedom and freedom of expression. We think that on so many scores, media must cooperate with government for progress. When government is doing something that is right, that's what we want government to do. And we think we must encourage them. So, but we must always be critical. Because governments are run by human beings, and human beings can always be different. We are as complex as whatever you can think of. So we must always be vigilant whilst accepting the good things that government
that's around safety of journalists as we go into the election. So we really want to hear from you as open as much as possible. In fact, yesterday when we met one of the officials, for instance, he was asking questions about editorials in newspapers about critical issues, making the elections, that they don't seem to see a lot of editorials in our newspapers, questioning government's manifesto promises against what they have been able to achieve and all of that. So we want to also hear from you as much as possible. It helps us to know what interventions we can also provide as far as
direction, because as it sits now. So I was speaking with my friend Stephen. We had this conversation. It was heated. We were talking about there is no space for neutrality. It's heart-rending. So now everybody is expected, even if you are not a part of that particular party, if you're not affiliated, everybody is expected for you to go and look or sound like you belong somewhere, or sound like, and this is really painful. So where is ground for neutrality? Some of us have fought hard for that ground wherein people can stand and say, I don't affiliate to this, I don't affiliate to that. I want to stand in that ground. We're losing it. And I must raise that. We are losing neutral ground in this country, in the media space. And, because of the poverty that Mr. Harding raised, it's also squeezing the life out of some of the ones who want to practice professionally. And you are in this dilemma wherein you are dealing in between maintaining your media house and also trying to stay neutral, trying to write as a trying to be professional journalist. And it's well heated. And let's talk about women. So now, I always raise this issue. So more women who should have come to the media and increase the number of women practicing, they're going into those public relations, they're going into becoming public communications officers, they're going into, some are even just doing consultants.
I was talking about media poverty and the challenges we have. We still have media owners who don't pay their staff the minimum wage. They own media houses, they've been journalists, and most of the people who own media houses are journalists, except for few people. Either they are journalists who went into politics or who are working in the private sector. But majority, I can't be corrected on that, but majority are journalists, and they still don't pay their staff the minimum wage. So these are the challenges, and these are the critical issues we should be discussing. How do we do that? You can't tell me you can't pay your staff the minimum wage, but you can buy a car for yourself. You're making money out of the business and you're not paying them. I said it at this large AGM the other day. We saw managers, station, even community radio station managers, earn well from what they get, and they have the reporters who just survive on their ID cards and stuff like that. These are the critical issues we should talk about. And I agree with Prof. I've been reading about collaborative journalism. How do we have media houses in Sierra Leone to work together, to collaborate and work? The problem of having many media institutions, especially newspaper, is because if I've been a reporter, I'm collecting your advert money for you, I know what comes in, and you are not paying me well. I can go and register to the IMC and start my own newspaper, and I can get the same advert and run the paper. So everyone wants to own a media house because they want to take care of themselves. That's the issues we should discuss.
It's drying up. I have worked in the print media for quite a long time. Recently I transitioned to broadcast. I run a radio station, and I know the challenges are similar whether you are in print or whether you are in broadcast media. Advertising revenue is drying up, and it's drying up because less and less corporate board. Government is the biggest advertiser, for the record. Corporate bodies are also advertising, but you now have more and more media institutions who are chasing those very few adverts. For corporate bodies, they are cutting down. On their media budget. So these are realities that we have to face, and those realities are now putting us in a very difficult situation. At some point, we also have to look at how do we ensure we find a solution that can sustain independent journalism devoid of advertisements, because at some point this is going to be a solution that will be untenable. We can't sustain ourselves just on advertising revenue, because even the little that is coming is not enough. If you are producing a newspaper today in Sierra Leone, you are probably spending 2 million euros per edition. If you are going maybe 12 page, maybe if you are going 16 page, you might be spending more. If you are running a radio station in Sierra Leone, you might be paying for fuel, if you are keeping your radio on, let's say for 16 hours, 12 or 14 hours, you are running on fuel. This month alone, every day, for example, we are using 40 liters of fuel. And that tells you the volume of money we are putting just on operation cost. So, and our advertising revenues might come, but like I say, it will be difficult. We are a commercial radio station. For community radio station, they are even having it even tougher. And given how important they are, we have to find a way. How do you sustain a community radio station in opposition stronghold or in government stronghold if a certain parliamentarian has to come for the weekend and buy fuel and let them run? And so it means the information they will be giving out to that particular community will obviously be skewed. And so at that community level, they don't even have the opportunities we have here. Whilst we are talking about advertising, at grassroots level, there is almost nothing. People come to obituaries, they virtually have to beg you to play it. So these are the realities that we are confronted with. And media poverty also means, for some of us who are running newspapers, who are running media, we are confronted by this every day. We are talented and we will make it in other industries. And every year we are losing some of the best and some of the brightest to the corporate world. Because at some point, journalism is for us, it's a practice, but it also has to pay the bills. And while some people might be content to really grind it out and know that this is a public service, but for some others to make ends meet, they do desperate things. And given the power we have, whether as radio stations or whether as newspapers, if a desperate man owns a newspaper or he owns a radio station and he wants to desperately feed himself or stay on, he can do desperate things which might be dangerous to public good. And so I know a lot of the time we turn to government, but we also perhaps need to turn to ourselves. I think Prof raised a very brilliant idea about thinking about margin. That can be one of the options on the table. A lot of us are still looking to government to see how can they best invest or create new avenues. But even with that, it's a catch-22 situation, because I don't think in Africa there is any government that is so selfless that wants to improve the media so much, because at the end of the day, the more power you give us, the more free you make us, the better we can practice, the stronger we are, the more strong we can hold them to account.